What's up, adventurers? Welcome back to a Dungeon Master's Tome. It's your favorite Dungeon Master, though you can just call me by my given name, Daddy. With the 2024 Player's Handbook rules embargo lifted, you're likely seeing a ton of content out there about what is and isn't in the new Player's Handbook. Unfortunately, I'm not famous enough yet to get access to those new rules, but I stayed up all night to watch a few videos, and I thought I would make a different kind of video. In this episode, we're going to do a deep dive on the core rules changes in the new Player's Handbook, and what my thoughts are on the balance of the system with these changes. What did the rules look like before? And what do these changes mean going forward? As always, if you like my videos, it would be super helpful if you subscribe, leave a comment, hit the little bell icon, and you can also find a link to my Discord community in the description below. Alright, so let's dive in. First and foremost, if you've been paying attention, one of the things that's changed is there are a lot less rules in the new Player's Handbook. What is there is a little more significant and easier to access, especially for new players. But I think it's also a good thing for players like me that have been here for a while. I like to think of it in the same way that Warhammer 7th edition was way too rules heavy, and so when they changed to 8th edition, we saw a lot of new players join, which was healthier for the game. Some of the rules, in fact, are completely missing. The rules for ability check contests, for example, they're gone, and I'm really excited for this change. Contested ability checks for things like grapple were always way too complicated. The process was never really straightforward, and the alternative in the new Player's Handbook is just so much better. Instead of a contested throw, they work like regular attacks with a set DC, making it easier all the way around. Another thing that is missing is passive skill checks. Passive skill checks aren't mentioned at all. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that this is because the Player's Handbook is geared more towards players and not dungeon masters. Passive skills were something that, for the most part, has always been exclusively something the DM would need to know. And I wonder if this is going to be talked about in the new Dungeon Master's Guide that drops later this year. Group checks are also no longer in the Player's Handbook. I once again think that this is something that maybe has moved to the new Dungeon Master's Guide. Players don't really need to know about group checks or how to do them. It's just something called for by the Dungeon Master. And the basic principle behind a group check is just a regular ability check, but from multiple players. So I'm hopeful that this will still be in the game as it speeds up play, but has just been moved to the Dungeon Master's Guide. Encumbrance is also missing from the new Player's Handbook. It was overly micromanagey before, and the new rules say that you can just carry all your gear and treasure and all the other stuff without worrying about it. If you do try to haul unusually heavy objects or a massive number of lighter objects, the Dungeon Master just might require you to abide by the rules for carrying capacity, which is in the rules glossary. I think that this is a fair change, and it's just memorializing in writing how many tables played to begin with. In the new 2024 Player's Handbook, the actions available to characters have also seen notable changes. In the old rules section, actions such as attack, dash, and disengage were well defined, but there was often confusion regarding specific actions like using objects or administering first aid. The new rules clarify and expand on these actions. The help action, for instance, now explicitly includes administering first aid, making it clear for players how to use healing kits or the medicine skill in combat. The hide action has been redefined to grant the invisible condition upon a successful dexterity stealth check. This change provides a more straightforward understanding of stealth mechanics and the benefits of hiding, which can be particularly advantageous for characters specializing in stealth and ambush tactics. I'm looking at you, my Pass Without Trace player friends. Several actions from the old rules have been renamed or slightly modified to enhance clarity. The cast spell action, for example, is now referred to as the magic action, encompassing not only spellcasting, but other magical abilities and features. This change helps to standardize terminology and avoid confusion regarding what constitutes a magical action. The use an object action has been renamed to utilize, specifically indicating the use of non-magical objects. This delineation ensures that players understand the distinction between using magic and non-magic items. It reduces ambiguity during gameplay, and additionally, new actions such as influence and study have been introduced, which to me is just chef's kiss. This categorization provides a clear framework for role-playing interactions and knowledge-based activities. The simplification and condensing of ability checks and actions in the new Player's Handbook offers both benefits and potential drawbacks. On the positive side, the streamlined rules reduce cognitive load on players and DMs, allowing for a faster and more fluid gameplay. By eliminating less commonly used mechanics like passive checks and group checks, the game becomes more accessible, especially for players. Though I still do hope that these made it into the DMG because they were extremely useful from a Dungeon Master's perspective. The clarified and expanded actions provide more explicit guidance, helping players to make more informed decisions during their turn. However, the removal of certain rules may also be seen as a loss of depth. The lack of group checks, if they don't make it into the DMG, for example, could diminish the sense of teamwork and cooperation in certain scenarios. Similarly, the absence of ability checks might reduce the opportunities for direct competition between characters. While the new rules promote simplicity and clarity, DMs and players who enjoyed the nuanced mechanics of the old system might find the new version lacking in complexity. These changes to ability checks and actions in the 2024 Player's Handbook reflect a broader trend towards simplification and clarity. These updates aim to make Dungeons & Dragons more accessible and enjoyable for a wider audience. And let's not be mistaken, this will work. By and large, new player bases enjoy a simpler, more easy to understand rule set. Let's jump into my absolute favorite change, surprise. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, the rules for surprise were fairly straightforward, but somewhat rigid. If a character or group of characters were not aware of an approaching threat, they could be surprised at the start of an encounter. This was typically determined by a stealth check from the ambushing party against the passive of the potential targets, noting that right now, passives aren't even mentioned at all. If the target failed to notice the ambusher, they were surprised, and they could not act during the first round of combat. This binary mechanic was clear, but often led to predictable outcomes that felt a bit too mechanical, reducing the element of surprise to a simple check and a missed turn. If the players lost, it often felt brutally punishing as they sat back an entire turn and watched the monsters unleash hell upon them. The 2024 Player's Handbook introduces a more nuanced and flexible surprise mechanic. Instead of a binary state, surprise now primarily affects initiative. If a combatant is unaware that combat is starting, they have disadvantage on their initiative roll. Conversely, if a character is hidden, and therefore has the invisible condition, when combat begins, they have advantage on their initiative roll. This approach gives the Dungeon Master more control and flexibility in determining how surprise happens. It'll allow more dynamic and varied encounters. It removes the absolute nature of old surprise rules, where being surprised meant losing an entire turn, which can be quite punishing. While we're on the topic of initiative, the old initiative rules were straightforward. Each participant in a combat encounter rolled a d20 and added their dexterity modifier, determining the order of actions. In the event of a tie, the default method for resolving this was by using the participants' dexterity scores, with the higher score going first. This method was, while functional, often felt arbitrary and didn't always reflect the tactical or situational advantages characters might have. The new initiative provides a fresh take on resolving ties, and I kind of like it. Now, if a tie occurs, the DM decides the order amongst tied monsters, and the players decide the order amongst tied characters. If a tie occurs between a monster and a player character, the DM decides the order. This change promotes a more collaborative approach to initiative ties amongst players and gives the DM more narrative control over the flow of combat. It also simplifies the tie-breaking process, eliminating the need to compare dexterity scores or come up with some sort of house rule. This change will lead to more strategic discussion amongst players and can be used by the DM to enhance the narrative and tension of the encounter. The revised surprise and initiative rules in the 2024 Player's Handbook represent a shift towards more flexible and narrative-driven gameplay. While these changes both simplify and improve the gameplay experience, they also require players and DMs to adapt to a more fluid and less rigid system. The increased emphasis on DM discretion means that the flow of combat can vary more from table to table, depending on the DM's style and preferences. For players who enjoy the predictability and structure of the old rules, this might require some adjustment. Let's jump into tactical movement in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Movement rules were detailed and often restrictive. Characters had to navigate various terrain types considering ally and enemy positions and dealing with specific penalties for moving through certain areas. Moving through an ally's space, for example, was considered difficult terrain, meaning it would cost twice as much movement to pass through. This often led to tactical frustrations, particularly in cramped environments like dungeons, where allies could inadvertently block each other's paths. Additionally, moving through an enemy's space was generally prohibited unless the enemy was incapacitated or much smaller, adding another layer of complexity to movement during combat. The 2024 Player's Handbook simplifies and clarifies these movement rules to create a more fluid and dynamic experience. One of the most significant changes is that moving through an ally's space is no longer considered difficult terrain, something that I've always just house ruled. This allows for a more strategic positioning and maneuvering experience during combat, and it enables players to move freely without worrying about being blocked by their own teammates. The rules for moving through an enemy's space remain largely the same, which kind of makes sense. It's treated as difficult terrain, and you can only move through an enemy's space if they're incapacitated or significantly smaller, like a swarm of bees. Additionally, the new rules introduce more clarity around ending your turn in another creature's space. In the old rules, it was generally prohibited, leading to potential confusion about what would happen if a character was forced into such a position. The new rules specify that if you unwillingly end your turn in another creature's space, you gain the prone condition. This provides a clear consequence and helps maintain the spatial dynamics of combat. The old movement rules, while comprehensive, often led to tactical bottlenecks and slowed down the pace of combat. The restriction on moving through allies as difficult terrain was particularly cumbersome, often requiring players to carefully plan their movements to avoid blocking each other. This could detract from the fluidity of combat and made tactical positioning more of a logistical challenge than a strategic one. The new rules have streamlined these aspects, allowing for a more seamless movement and a more seamless positioning. It removes difficult terrain penalty through allies so that players can focus more on the overall strategy and less on micromanaging their movement. This change encourages more dynamic and cooperative play. You can sense a theme here. Players can more easily position themselves to flank enemies, provide support, or retreat when necessary. One of the rules I always tried to use as a DM, but almost always hated, was exhaustion. The old rules for exhaustion in the 2014 Player's Handbook were detailed, but often seen as very cumbersome and difficult to remember. Exhaustion was tracked on a scale of 6 levels, with each level imposing progressively severe penalties on characters. These penalties ranged from disadvantage on ability checks at level 1 to outright death at level 6. The specific effects at each level were distinct and varied, which made it hard for players and DMs to keep track of them, without consistently referring to the rulebook. This complexity often discouraged the use of exhaustion as a mechanic, despite its potential to add depth to the game. In the 2024 Player's Handbook, the rules for exhaustion have been significantly streamlined and simplified. The new exhaustion system still uses a scale of 1 to 6, but the penalties are now consistent and very easy to remember. Each level of exhaustion imposes a -2 penalty on all D20 rolls. This is abilities checks, saving throws, attack rolls, and it reduces your character's speed by 10 feet. At 6 levels of exhaustion, the character still dies. This linear progression is much more intuitive, making it easier for both players and DMs to track and apply the effects of exhaustion. The simplification of the rule has several implications. Firstly, it makes the mechanic more accessible and easier to use. More people are probably going to use it at their table. It encourages DMs to incorporate it into their campaigns more frequently. You won't be able to stay up for 72 hours straight with no penalties. This will add a layer of tension and realism to the games without being too overly complex. Characters will face consequences of pushing themselves too hard. The consistent penalties at each level mean that players can quickly understand and anticipate the effects of exhaustion. This will allow for better strategic planning and decision-making. However, the simplified system also means that the penalties for exhaustion are less varied. Some players and DMs might miss the nuanced effects of the old rules, which could represent the specific ways in which exhaustion begins to manifest, such as impaired physical and mental capabilities. Okay, so I've used this rule at my table. When a player brings a healthy snack, they get inspiration, which is the next topic of change. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, inspiration was a mechanic that allowed players to gain advantage on a roll by spending an inspiration point. Inspiration was awarded by the DM for role-playing, creativity, or other noteworthy actions. However, the mechanic was often underutilized or forgotten completely, as it required the DM to remember and award inspiration to players, and then it required the players to remember to use it before making a roll. Additionally, the requirement to use inspiration before the roll made it less flexible and sometimes less impactful. In order to keep track myself, I use these little magnet cards, and they have a little inspiration tracker on the bottom. In the 2024 Player's Handbook, it introduces several changes to inspiration. Now, inspiration is called heroic inspiration. The new rule allows players to re-roll any die after rolling it, rather than just gaining advantage on the roll. This includes not only D20 rolls, but also damage rolls, hit dice, and basically anything. It provides much greater flexibility and utility. Additionally, certain features and conditions can automatically grant heroic inspiration, such as the human species trait that awards it after a long rest, and the musician origin feat that allows awarding it after any rest. The changes to inspiration greatly enhance its utility and strategic value. By allowing players to re-roll any dice, heroic inspiration becomes a powerful tool that can be used in a wide variety of situations. It'll make it more likely to be remembered and utilized. This change will encourage players to take bold actions and roleplay creatively without worrying about what might happen as long as they have a heroic die. Spellcasting in the 2014 Player's Handbook was detailed and included specific limitations on how spells could be cast. One of the most notable restrictions was that if a character cast a spell using a bonus action, they could not cast another spell on the same turn, except for a cantrip with the casting time of one action. This rule, while intended to balance the power of spellcasters, often led to confusion and frustration. Players had to carefully plan their actions to avoid inadvertently breaking this rule, which could disrupt the flow of combat. I can't tell you how many times I would see an argument around how this rule was meant to be interpreted in online forums. The 2024 Player's Handbook introduces a significant change. The new rule states, that a character can only expel one spell slot per turn, regardless of how many spells they cast. This means that a character can cast a spell using a spell slot as a bonus action. They can still then cast a cantrip or use other abilities as their action. This change simplifies the spellcasting process and eliminates the need to remember the old, more restrictive rule. The new spellcasting rules provide greater flexibility and ease for use by spellcasters. By allowing the casting of a cantrip and a spell using a spell slot in the same turn, the game opens up new strategic possibilities for characters. This change encourages creative use of spells and abilities, making spellcasters more versatile and dynamic in combat. However, the limitation for only spending one spell slot per turn can seem a little restricting, particularly if you can get multiple actions on a turn. This ensures that spellcasters don't become overly powerful while maintaining a balance within the game. This rule is straightforward and easy to remember. It reduces the cognitive load on players and DMs alike. Speaking of new spells, let's talk about the 9 new spells making their appearance in the Player's Handbook. I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to go from cantrip and work my way up from there. There are, of course, changes and updates to existing spells, like Force Cage requiring concentration, but we can talk about those in a different video. First off, Elementalism. This cantrip is designed for druids, sorcerers, and wizards. It lets you control elements to create minor effects like a breeze, shroud of dust, harmless embers, mist, some clean water, or sculpt elements. In regards to roleplay and utility, this spell will create effects to enhance storytelling, such as lighting a dark area with embers or leaving a message in the dirt. It does have limited combat utility, as it may see use mainly through minor distractions or elemental manipulations. It's similar to Prestidigitation, as it adds flavor and minor utility without breaking game mechanics. I think it's kind of fun. It's a thematic cantrip that fits well with elemental-themed characters. Next up is Star Wisp. This cantrip is available for bards and druids. It deals radiant damage and prevents the target from benefiting from invisibility. This cantrip provides reliable damage dealing with added utility against invisible or hiding creatures. While in roleplay, it can illuminate and prevent stealthy creatures from escaping detection. I think it fits well within the power level of existing damage cantrips with a unique niche countering invisibility. I think it's balanced and useful for lower level casters. Up next, Sorceress Burst. This cantrip is limited to only sorcerers, and it deals damage of various types, with the potential for added damage on high rolls. It is a reliable source of diverse damage, increasing versatility in combat. It will allow the sorcerer, which I believe is the weakest in my opinion of the spellcasters, to adapt to enemy resistances and vulnerabilities more easily. It has potential for high damage output, but it is balanced by its randomness, and it's limited to the sorcerer subclass. It's both fun and thematic and adds a little bit of excitement to spellcasting. Alright, up next is Arcane Vigor. This is a level 2 spell, available to both sorcerers and wizards. It heals the caster by expending hit dice. I love the move towards allowing other classes to heal themselves. This means that adventuring parties are less likely to always need a healing main. It is limited though by available hit dice, preventing overuse, and I believe it's a useful addition that gives casters more survivability without overshadowing dedicated healers. Fountain of Moonlight, which is level 4. It's available to the Bard and Druid, and this spell grants radiant resistance, extra radiant damage on melee attacks, and a reaction to blind attackers. It is 100% a combat buff. It enhances melee combat capabilities and provides defensive options through damage resistance and reactive blinding. I think it fits well with moon-themed characters and scenarios, and is a strong utility and combat enhancement, though limited by its lack of upcasting options. Galisa's Storm of Radiance, level 5 for warlocks and wizards. This spell creates a storm of light and thunder and causes blindness, deafness, and prevents spellcasting with verbal components. It deals radiant and thunder damage. Use it to blind and deafen enemies, preventing spellcasting and causing chaos in their ranks. It also deals decent damage, which will be particularly effective against creatures weak to radiant or thunder damage. It is a strong control spell with solid damage. The concentration requirement in con save balances its powerful effect, making it a valuable but not overpowered option for mid-level casters. Yolanda's Regal Presence, a level 5 spell. This spell is for bards and wizards. It emits an aura causing psychic damage, the prone condition, and pushes creatures. It is an area control spell for disrupting enemy formations and to force enemies to reposition, making them vulnerable. It can be used to aid melee allies. Those marshals always need a spellcaster's help. It can do so by knocking enemies prone and pushing them into disadvantageous positions. It is both thematically and mechanically solid, though it's not exceptionally powerful for a level 5 spell. It's balanced by its moderate damage and control effects. This one's my favorite, Tasha's Bubbling Cauldron, level 6. The bubbles go to warlocks and wizards. This spell conjures a cauldron, and that cauldron produces potions of common or uncommon variety. I think this is so cool. It provides a variety of potions before a big encounter, enhancing the party's versatility and preparedness, and it has long-term utility by helping to create and store useful potions for future use. It is extremely versatile and powerful, though balanced by the material components and the prep time that has to go into it. The limitation on the number of potions and their temporary nature does prevent abuse. This is likely going to become a staple for strategic players. And okay, maybe this one's my favorite, but Power Word Fortify, which is a level 7. This is available to Bard and Cleric spell lists, and I'm a sucker for Power Word spells. I just think they're so cool. It grants temporary hit points to up to 6 creatures. You should use this before entering a tough fight to give the party extra buffs to your hit points, similarly to how the aid spell worked. It can quickly bolster allies' defenses in the midst of battle. It is mechanically useful, but thematically I feel it's kind of pretty plain for a power word spell. The flexibility in distributing temporary hit points makes it versatile, though less exciting than some other high-level spells. Overall, these new spells add a great mix of utility, flavor, and combat effectiveness to the D&D game system. They're well balanced within their respective levels and provide new options for classes that traditionally lacked certain abilities, such as healing for wizards and sorcerers. The cantrips, in particularly, are powerful and noteworthy for their potential to see frequent use and their unique thematic elements. Overall, these spells will likely see widespread adoption and add exciting new dimensions to gameplay. I guess that's it, everybody. I need a cup of coffee and a nap. I'm on vacation next week, so I may not have a new video to post. I guess we'll see how tomorrow goes. Until next time, keep rolling those dice, and may the quests be epic. Honey, where's my super suit?